A man can spend 30 years building a company with his bare hands and still not understand the first thing about the people he built it for. I know that now. I learned it lying in a hospital bed with a tube in my arm, staring at a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped like Ohio, while the two people who should have been in the room beside me were 3,000 miles away taking pictures of their toes in the sand. Family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the person who shows up when showing up costs them something. I found that out at 61 years old, and it nearly broke me before it put me back together. Welcome back to the channel. If you're the kind of person who believes loyalty means something, who believes a parent's sacrifice shouldn't be treated like a coupon to be cashed in whenever it's convenient, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. I read every one of them. Your stories are the reason I keep telling mine. Now let me tell you about the summer my son and daughter taught me exactly who they were, and my niece taught me who I still could be. My name is Walter. I'm 62 years old, and for 31 years I ran a mid-sized furniture manufacturing business outside of Greensboro, North Carolina. Watson Fine Furnishings started in a rented warehouse with 4 employees and a bank loan. I was terrified I'd never pay back. By the time I was 50, we had 86 people on payroll and a client list that stretched from Charlotte to Richmond. I built that company with sawdust in my lungs and calluses on my hands, and I built it, I told myself, for my children. Everything I earned was supposed to become their inheritance, their safety net, their proof that their father loved them. My wife, Diane, died of ovarian cancer when our daughter Kayla was 9 years old. Our son Preston was 12. I remember standing at her graveside in the rain, holding both of their small hands, and making a promise to her headstone that I would never let them feel the ground disappear from under them the way it had disappeared from under me. I kept that promise so completely that I forgot promises like that have a cost, and the cost isn't paid by the parent. It's paid by the children. Later, when the world finally asks something of them and they discover they were never taught how to answer. When Preston was 17, he backed my company truck into a parked delivery van outside a strip mall and did $4,000 of damage. I paid it off before he'd even finished his excuse. When Kayla, at 20, decided 2 semesters into her business degree at Appalachian State that college wasn't really her thing, I didn't ask a single hard question. I kept paying her apartment lease, her car insurance, her cell phone bill, because some part of me equated a full bank transfer with being a good father. Preston is 26 now, still living in a condo I own outright, working a job title I invented for him at my own company that pays him more than men, twice his experience and half his attitude. Kayla is 23, waiting tables 3 nights a week and treating the other 4 as vacation, still on my insurance, still calling me when her rent is short. My brother Daniel was the opposite of me in almost every way. Where I was cautious and calculating, Daniel was reckless and warm, the kind of man who'd give a stranger his last $20 and laugh about it later. He never built anything that lasted, financially speaking, but he built a daughter named Sophie, who I would come to understand was worth more than every asset on my balance sheet combined. Daniel died 4 years ago in a construction accident, a scaffolding collapse outside of Winston-Salem that took him in about 6 seconds, according to the report I read 100 times and never showed to anyone. Sophie was 19 then, in her 2nd year at community college, with no mother in the picture and no safety net at all. I did what I thought was the right thing. I told her she always had a room in my house, that she was welcome at every holiday, every Sunday dinner, no obligation attached. What I didn't expect was how she'd take that offer and turn it into something I never asked for. She started coming by on Wednesday evenings to help me organize the garage. She noticed when my knee started bothering me on the stairs and quietly bought a cane from the pharmacy and left it by my bed without a word about it, like she hadn't wanted to embarrass me by making it a conversation. She worked the counter at a veterinary clinic on Battleground Avenue, made maybe $14 an hour, and still showed up at my door every other Friday with a 6-pack of the root beer I liked, refusing to let me pay her back for it. She never asked me for money, not once, in 4 years. I want you to sit with that fact for a moment, because it matters for what comes later. The trouble started building the way trouble always does in a family like mine, quietly, over years, disguised as generosity. I had spent 6 months planning what I called the big trip, a 2-week Alaskan cruise for the three of us, Preston, Kayla, and me, to celebrate what would have been Diane's 60th birthday. It was sentimental in a way I don't usually allow myself to be. I wanted to stand on the deck of that ship with my children and feel, just once, like the family we might have been if cancer hadn't taken half of us out of the equation. I paid $22,000 for the 3 staterooms. I'd been looking forward to it more than I let on. 9 days before we were supposed to fly out of Charlotte, I woke up at 4 in the morning with a pain in my chest that I initially mistook for heartburn. By 6, I couldn't draw a full breath. My neighbor, a retired nurse named Carol Higgins, found me on my kitchen floor when she came by to return a ladder and called the ambulance herself. It turned out to be a cardiac event, not a full heart attack, the cardiologist at Cone Health explained, but close enough to one that they kept me for observation, ran a stress test, and told me in no uncertain terms that international travel, let alone the physical demands of shore excursions in Alaska, was completely out of the question for at least 6 weeks. I called Preston from the hospital bed myself. I remember the exact words I used because I've replayed them so many times since. I said, "Son, I need you to understand this is serious. The doctor used the word cardiac event. I can't get on that ship." There was a pause on the line, and then Preston said, "Dad, we already packed. Kayla bought like 4 new swimsuits. Can't you just, I don't know, take it easy and let us go? You'll still get your money's worth out of the trip, technically, since we're using it." I asked him, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be, if he was going to come see me at the hospital before he left for the airport. He said he had a lot to do before the flight and that visiting hours would eat into his packing time, but that he'd call me from the ship. Kayla didn't call at all. She sent a text that read, "So sorry you're sick. Hope you feel better. This cruise has been the plan for months. You understand, right?" There was a laughing emoji at the end of that message. I stared at that emoji for a long time in the fluorescent light of my hospital room, wondering when exactly my daughter had learned to find her father's chest pain funny, or if she'd simply never learned not to. Sophie showed up 40 minutes after Carol Higgins called her, still wearing her scrubs from the vet clinic, having left in the middle of her shift. She didn't ask permission. She didn't check if it was convenient. She walked into that hospital room, took one look at the monitors and the IV line, and pulled a chair up to the side of my bed like she intended to stay there indefinitely, which, as it turned out, she did. If this story is bringing up some feelings for you, if you've ever laid somewhere vulnerable and realized exactly who in your life actually shows up, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. It helps this channel reach the people who need to hear these stories the most. And I promise you, this one gets better before it gets worse, and then a whole lot better after that. Preston and Kayla flew out of Charlotte Douglas 2 days later, while I was still in a hospital bed with wires taped to my chest. Sophie asked her manager at the clinic for a leave of absence, which she was granted only because the clinic owner, a decent man named Dr. Osei, had met her at Daniel's funeral and understood exactly what kind of person she was. She moved a small bag of clothes into my guest room, the one that used to be Preston's, and for the next 9 days she ran my entire life. She drove me home from the hospital in her ancient Honda Civic with the check engine light permanently illuminated. She filled my prescriptions at the CVS on Battleground Avenue and set up a pill organizer with the days of the week printed on it like I was 80 instead of 62. She cooked meals low in sodium because she'd actually sat down and read the discharge papers the cardiologist gave me, papers I hadn't even fully read myself. She slept on the pull-out couch some nights just to be close enough to hear me if something went wrong in the night, and twice, it nearly did. Once, around 2 in the morning, I woke up with my heart pounding in an irregular rhythm that terrified me, and it was Sophie who sat beside me in the dark, timing my pulse against her phone, talking me through slow breaths until it settled, and who drove me to the emergency room at 3 in the morning without a single word of complaint, still wearing pajama pants and one of my old work jackets over them because she hadn't stopped to change. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles northwest, my children were posting. Kayla's page filled up with photographs of glaciers and whale tails breaking the surface of gray water, of Preston holding a cocktail with a little paper umbrella in it on the pool deck, laughing at something outside the frame. There was a video of the two of them at a formal dinner on the ship, dressed sharp, toasting each other with champagne flutes, the caption reading, "Making Memories," with 3 heart emojis. Not one message asked how my heart was doing. Not one photograph included a caption wondering if their father, who had paid for every drink in every one of those photographs, was alive to see them. I watched those posts from my recliner with a blood pressure cuff still velcroed to my arm, and something in me that had been slowly eroding for years finally gave way completely. On the 5th day, Kayla texted me a photograph of a turquoise bracelet from a jewelry shop in Juneau, along with the message, "This is so me. Can you send me 200 to grab it before the shop closes? I'll pay. You back. I swear." I looked at that message for a long time. I looked at Sophie, asleep on my pull-out couch with a paperback novel splayed open on her chest, still in the scrubs she'd worn all day, because she hadn't had a spare minute to change. And something in my chest that had nothing to do with cardiology finally clarified itself into a decision. I didn't send Kayla the $200. I didn't respond to the text at all. Instead, the next morning, once Sophie had gone to the pharmacy to refill one of my prescriptions, I called a man named Robert Ellison, who had handled my company's legal affairs and my personal estate planning for over 20 years. Robert had been at Daniel's funeral. Robert had watched Sophie, at 19 years old, quietly organize the guest book table without anyone asking her to. He knew exactly who she was. "Robert," I said, "I need you to come by the house on Thursday morning. Bring everything, the trust documents, the deed to the property, the paperwork on my shares in the company. We're making some changes, and I need it finished before my children get back from Alaska." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The kind of pause a good lawyer gives you before he asks if you're absolutely certain, because he's seen enough families to know that decisions made in anger get regretted, but decisions made in clarity rarely do. "Walter," he finally said, "are you sure about this? This is a significant restructuring. I want to make sure this is coming from a clear head and not just from being hurt." I looked out my kitchen window at the empty driveway, at the space where Preston's car should have been parked if he'd bothered to visit his father in the hospital even once, and I said, "Robert, I have never had a clearer head in my life. I'll see you Thursday at 10. Thursday morning, Robert Ellison arrived at 9:55 with a leather folder under his arm and the calm, unhurried manner of a man who has watched 100 families implode and learned not to let any of it show on his face. Sophie was at the vet clinic, finally back for a half shift, blissfully unaware that anything was happening at all. Robert and I sat at my dining room table for nearly 3 hours, going through every document line by line. My furniture company, my house on Willowbrook Lane, the one I'd built with my own hands the same year Kayla was born, my retirement accounts, my life insurance, the small rental property I owned downtown that generated a modest but steady income, all of it, restructured, rewritten, resealed. I want to be honest with you here, the way I try to be honest, in every story I tell you, because I think you deserve that, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight. What I did next wasn't purely about punishment. It came from punishment's first cousin, which is clarity. For 31 years, I had confused generosity with love, and in doing so, I had failed both of my children in a way that no amount of money could ever repair. I understood, sitting at that table with Robert's gold pen scratching across page after page, that continuing to hand them everything wasn't love at all. It was theft. I was stealing from them the one thing every human being actually needs in order to become someone worth knowing, which is the experience of consequence. Robert left at 1 in the afternoon with a folder full of signed documents and a promise to have everything formally recorded and filed by the following Monday. I sat alone at that dining room table for a long while afterward, in the quiet of a house that had never once, in 31 years, felt quite this still. My children flew back into Charlotte Douglas on a Sunday evening. I know because Kayla texted me from baggage claim asking if I could pick them up, since apparently the rideshare prices were insane after a cruise ship docked and unloaded 4,000 tourists at once. I did not go. Sophie, home from her shift and completely unaware of what was waiting to unfold, offered to drive them, because that's who Sophie is. The kind of person who extends kindness even to people who've never once extended it back to her. I let her go. I needed her out of the house for what was coming, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted her to walk into the aftermath instead of the confrontation itself. She deserved better than to be a spectator to a fight she had nothing to do with. Preston and Kayla walked through the front door at a little after 7 that evening, sunburned across their shoulders, dragging suitcases still wrapped in the little paper luggage tags from the cruise line. We're on laughing about something, mid-conversation, the easy laughter of two people who'd had a wonderful 2 weeks and hadn't spent a single minute of it thinking about the man who'd made it possible. They stopped laughing the moment they saw me sitting at the head of the dining room table, not in my recliner where they expected to find their fragile, grateful father, but upright, dressed, with a folder of documents squared neatly in front of me. "Dad," Preston said, his duffel bag sliding off his shoulder onto the hardwood floor. "What's all this? Are you okay? You look, I don't know, different." "Sit down," I said. My voice was even. It didn't waver, and I was grateful for that, because I'd worried it might. "Both of you, we need to talk about some things." Kayla dropped into the chair across from me with a theatrical sigh, still holding a half-empty water bottle from the airport. "Dad, we've been traveling for like 14 hours. Can this wait until tomorrow? I really need a shower." "It can't," I said. "And it won't." "Sit down, Kayla." Something in my tone must have finally registered, because she sat, arms crossed, jaw already set in the expression I'd come to recognize over the years as the face she made whenever the world dared to inconvenience her. 9 days ago, I said, I had what the doctors called a cardiac event. I collapsed in my own kitchen. I called you, Preston, from the hospital, and you asked me if you could still go on the cruise. I never heard from you at all, Kayla, except for a text with a laughing emoji and later a request for $200 to buy a bracelet. Preston shifted in his seat, his face reddening slightly. "Dad, we didn't know it was that serious. You said you'd be fine. The doctor cleared you to go home, right? That's what you told us." "I told you I was going home," I said. "Not that I was fine." "There's a significant difference, and you didn't ask which one it was. You didn't ask because you didn't want the answer to interfere with your vacation." I opened the folder in front of me, not for dramatic effect, though I understand it must have looked that way, but because I needed to see the documents in my own hands to steady myself through what came next. "While the two of you were on a cruise ship I paid for, taking photographs of whale tails, your cousin Sophie left her job, moved into this house, and kept me alive. She sat with me at 3 in the morning when my heart went into an irregular rhythm that terrified both of us. She drove me to the emergency room in her pajamas. She has never, in the 4 years since your Uncle Daniel died, asked me for a single dollar." Kayla's arms tightened across her chest. "So what, this is a competition now? Sophie gets a gold star for being poor and helpful?" "We didn't know how bad it was, Dad. That's not fair. I called you from a hospital bed," I said, and for the first time my voice did rise, just slightly, just enough for both of them to go still. The words, "cardiac event," came out of my mouth, Preston, and your response was to ask if you could still make your flight. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a value system, and it's one I built in both of you, because I never once made either of you sit with a consequence in your entire lives. I paid for the wrecked car. I paid for the dropped classes. I paid for the apartment, the insurance, the phone bill. Every single time either of you hit resistance in this world, I removed it before you had to feel it. I convinced myself that was love. I understand now that it was the opposite. It was theft. I stole your ability to become people who could stand on your own, and I am not going to keep stealing it from you for one more day." "What is that supposed to mean?" Preston asked, his voice dropping, the color draining slowly from his sunburned face, as though some part of him already understood where this was headed. "It means," I said, sliding the folder an inch further across the table, though I didn't open it for them yet, "that as of Thursday morning, I restructured my estate. Effective immediately, The house on Willowbrook Lane has been placed into an irrevocable trust. The primary beneficiary of that trust is Sophie Marsh. Kayla stood up so fast her chair skidded backward across the hardwood and nearly toppled. You gave the house to Sophie? Our house? Dad, that's insane. She's not even your daughter. She has been more of a daughter to me in the last 9 days, I said, meeting her eyes without flinching, than either of you has been in the last 9 years. Preston, your position at Watson Fine Furnishings, the title I invented for you, the salary that was never tied to any real performance metric, that position has been eliminated effective this Friday. Human Resources will process it through the standard company channels, same as anyone else who's let go. Kayla, the apartment lease I've been co-signing and the insurance and the phone bill I've been covering, all of that ends at the close of this month. You have 30 days to make other arrangements. I think that's more than fair, considering the two of you gave your own father exactly 0 days when he needed you. Preston's hands had gone white-knuckled against the edge of the table. Dad, you can't just cut us off. How are we supposed to live? I don't even know how to. I've never had to. What am I supposed to do for money? You're going to do what every capable adult in this country figures out how to do, I said, standing now myself, closing the folder gently in front of me. You're going to get a job, and I mean an actual job, not a title I made up to keep you comfortable. You're going to learn what your cousin has known since she was 19 years old, which is that showing up for the people who love you isn't optional. It's the whole point. I am 62 years old. I nearly died alone in a hospital bed 9 days ago, while my own children argued with me about a cruise ship. I am done pretending that money can stand in for the things it was never meant to replace. Kayla was crying by then, but it wasn't grief, not really. It was the particular fury of someone watching a bottomless well finally run dry. The panic of realizing the ground she'd never once had to test was suddenly gone. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cracking. You're going to be sitting in this house all alone, and you're going to regret every bit of this. I won't be alone, I said quietly, and I meant it with everything in me. That's the part neither of you ever understood. I have never once, in 4 years, been alone when it mattered, because your cousin made sure of it, without ever once asking for anything in return. They left that night, not immediately. There was more shouting, more disbelief. Preston making increasingly desperate phone calls to friends asking if he could crash on a couch for a few days. Kayla slamming the guest bathroom door hard enough that a framed photograph in the hallway shook loose from its nail. But by 10 o'clock, they were gone. Their cruise ship luggage tags still clinging stubbornly to the suitcase handles as they wheeled them out into the driveway and away into a life they'd never once had to build for themselves. Sophie came home a little after 11, having stayed late at the vet clinic covering an emergency surgery on a golden retriever that had swallowed something it shouldn't have. She found me still sitting at the dining room table, the folder closed in front of me, the house quieter than it had been in years. Uncle Walter, she said, setting her bag down slowly, reading something in my face that told her the evening had held more than an ordinary homecoming. What happened? Where are Preston and Kayla? I told her. All of it, plainly, without dressing it up or softening it, because Sophie has never once needed anything softened for her. When I finished, she sat down across from me, quiet for a long moment, and then she said, Uncle Walter, I didn't do any of that because I wanted something from you. I did it because you're family, and because you would have done exactly the same thing for me, and I didn't need a reason beyond that. I know, I said, and I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand that had held a stethoscope to my chest and timed my pulse in the dark at 3 in the morning. That's exactly why it's yours, not because you asked, because you never did. The house has been quiet these last few months, quieter than I expected, though not in a way that feels empty anymore. Sophie still comes by on Wednesday evenings, though now it's her house too, in every way that matters. She's applying to a veterinary technician program at a community college in the spring, and I'll be paying her tuition not because she asked, but because for the first time in years, I understand the difference between rescuing someone from consequence and simply standing beside someone while they build a life they've actually earned. Preston, I'm told through mutual acquaintances, found work at a distribution warehouse outside of Kernersville. Kayla moved into a shared apartment with 2 roommates and picked up a second job at a retail store in the mall. I don't know if either of them will ever forgive me. I've made my peace with the possibility that they won't. What I know for certain is this: love that never asks anything of the people it's given to isn't love at all. It's abdication dressed up in a father's clothing. It took a weak heart and an empty hospital room to teach me that the family worth protecting isn't always the family you're born connected to. Sometimes it's the niece who shows up in her work scrubs at midnight without being asked twice. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life who showed up when it counted, or if it reminded you of a lesson you had to learn the hard way yourself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It truly does help these stories find the people who need them most. Take care of the people who take care of you, and I'll see you in the next one.